130 nations, including Canada, are backing a plan to set a global minimum corporate tax rate of 15%. The goal is to ensure companies pay their fair share. But this weekend, France is expected to push for a higher ceiling while G20 finance ministers meet in Venice. Bruno Maire is France's finance minister. He's with us from Paris. Minister Maire, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You've called this the most important international tax agreement in a century. What makes you describe it in those terms?
Because it is a total overhaul of the international taxation system. This is the first time where we will have the possibility of having a fair taxation of digital giants. You know that they are escaping the right level of taxation since they do not have any physical presence in the countries where they are making profits. So that's the first point why it is such a breakthrough in the international history. The second reason why it is so important, it is that for the first time, we are putting the race to the bottom to an end. And I'm deeply convinced that this race to the bottom on taxation is clearly a dead end because it does not provide us the necessary public funding for the public services. And the third reason why it is clearly a historic agreement is the total amount of money which is at stake. If you are looking only at Pillar 2, the assessment from the OECD on the revenue of this Pillar 2 is around $150 billion. I think it is a clear evidence that this agreement, if it is adopted by the G20 member states this week in Italy, will be a breakthrough in the international taxation system.
So you're moving closer to a consensus on the principles of what this would look like. But I wonder, sir, how far away is this from being implemented?
I think that, first of all, I would like to recall that we have been fighting at the French level from the very beginning for this new international taxation system. And clearly, the first impetus to this agreement has been given 4 years ago by France. And I think that all French people should be proud about this determination of President Macron and the French government to support this international taxation. Now we could have, at the level of the G20, in a few hours, an agreement among the 20 most important countries around the world. Then the implementation, I think that we should aim at having an implementation between 2022 and 2023 in 1 or 2 years. We have been waiting too long for adopting this international taxation system. Now it's time to decide to adopt this new system and to implement it in, let's say, between 1 or 2 years, not much more.
So adopting it and implementing it, you've got a timeline and a sense of how that might happen. How do you do the enforcement component of this, sir? Because, you know, you have large economies like China, which have their economic zones, which are low tax environments. And, you know, I don't need to tell you that China doesn't always play by the global playbook and can simply shrug off attempts to enforce it. So how do you make something like this stick once it's agreed to?
I think that there is an instrument that has been decided within the OECD to have a look at the fair implementation of this international taxation system and to ensure that there is a fair implementation of this international system. So I fully trust the OECD to put in place the necessary tools so that this international taxation system with, once again, financial means at stake, which are quite important, will be duly and fairly implemented.
Now, I know the OECD has endorsed a minimum rate of 15% for corporate tax, and I think that's what the G7 finance ministers have discussed. But you're on the record as saying you'd like it to be as high as possible, while we have Ireland saying 15% is too high. Where do you think this will ultimately land?
You know, during the negotiation, when the US administration proposed 21%, France supported the idea of having a level of minimum taxation for the corporate tax at 21%. Then the US administration explained that they wanted to have 15%. We proposed to add during the G7 meeting 15% at least. So let's be very clear, for the French government, the 15% are a starting point and not the end of the story. So 15%, it is at least 15%, and certainly not under 15%.
I just want to switch gears to one more topic before I let you go, and that is climate change, because that is expected to dominate your meetings as well this week. And there's been a push to phase out fossil fuel subsidies, for example. What can we expect to come out of this summit when it comes to the issue of tackling climate change?
I think that first of all, we should be aware that we are not where we should be on the fight against climate change. We should be aware that the G20 member states have a huge responsibility in the fight against climate change, since they are representing all the 20 members of the G20, 80% of the CO2 emissions around the world. So we have a huge responsibility on our shoulders. And I really think that we need an immediate, coordinated, and drastic action. And that's the point on which I will be the most insisting during the coming days. We need a drastic, coordinated, immediate, and efficient action in the fight against climate change. We are not at the level where we should be. This means that we need to have an incentive to reduce carbon CO2 emissions, which should be and must be much stronger. We need a carbon border adjustment mechanism, and this is one of the points that we will be supporting during the presidency of the EU, which we will have at the beginning of 2022 in France. And we will make some other proposals during the G20 so that we ensure that we keep the momentum and we are reducing the CO2 emissions as soon as possible. Once again, we should do more. And one of the consequences of the crisis that we lived is that we should, at the end of the economic crisis and at the end of the pandemic, accelerate our fight against climate change.
Okay, Minister, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.